Thousands are dead and millions displaced, but has the world stopped watching? A humanitarian truce has been declared in Ethiopia, but will it serve to stop a brutal civil war? As the conflict becomes even more complicated, who can broker peace? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the crisis in Ethiopia. For 17 months, Ethiopia has been embroiled in a devastating civil war. Thousands have been killed and many more are threatened by a severe humanitarian crisis. It's a highly complicated conflict, but at its core is a battle between the central government in Addis Ababa and the northern Tigray-based rebel group, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. Their battle for power has not only claimed many lives, it's also forced millions into the depths of poverty. Compounding that, the violence has prevented vital humanitarian aid from reaching those in desperate need. According to the United Nations, 9 million people in the northern regions of Tigray, Amhara, and Afar need food assistance. But last week, there was a breakthrough. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government announced a humanitarian truce to speed up aid delivery, a decision that many in the country and abroad have welcomed.
The government's decision is good because the people are starving there, and it will also improve the cost of living in our country. It is the right decision both economically and socially.
We didn't see any change until now. The consequence of the war is chaos, destruction and starvation, right from the beginning. We have relatives here and there.
We can only eat our daily bread when there is peace. It's very pleasing to negotiate for peace, especially for our sisters and brothers in the north.
But it's a fragile truce, and the longer the war continues, the more complicated it gets. Neighboring countries have been drawn into the conflict, and while the violence has eased in Tigray and Amhara, fighting has reportedly become fierce in the state of Afar. So how did Ethiopia, a nation that just a few years ago many considered a rising star in Africa, fall so far so fast? Well, when Abiy Ahmed swept to power in 2018, he made radical changes quickly. He ended his country's 2-decade-long war with Eritrea and brought about sweeping reforms. Abiy was a hero to many at home and abroad. His efforts even won him the Nobel Peace Prize. But not long after taking office, Abiy pushed the once dominant TPLF out of government. The group continued its struggle for political power from its stronghold in the north. But toward the end of 2020, the government launched an offensive after accusing the TPLF of attacking an army base. But with this humanitarian truce, many hope that a lasting peace can now be created.
The Secretary General urges all parties to the conflict to build on this encouraging development and to take the necessary steps towards ending this long-term conflict, steps towards a long-term ceasefire.
So is this humanitarian truce what's needed to at least begin to quell the conflict in Ethiopia? Joining me now to try to answer that is Tsedale Lemma. She's a journalist and founder of the Addis Standard, a highly influential Ethiopian news magazine. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm hoping you can give us a clearer picture of what's actually happening now, starting with this humanitarian truce. Tell us what's really behind it, and do you believe it will actually bring sustained relief to those suffering, or is it just going to pause the fighting?
Thanks for having me. If it was a genuine truce, yes, it is the very, very beginning sign that we might be seeing the end of this tragic war after 18 months. But tragically, again, the truce is not being observed, and because it's not an agreed upon truce to begin with. It's a unilateral truce, what the government said was a unilateral humanitarian truce, but there is a lack of genuinity in it. So nothing has changed since a week now. If it was genuine, it would have been the beginning of a hopeful time to come.
Okay, but we are hearing clearly that the TPLF has accepted it, because the TPLF has also recognized the desperate need for humanitarian aid to arrive.
They did. The Tigrayan government issued a statement, but in that statement, what they said is that they will observe the cessation of hostilities if the humanitarian aid could get into Tigray unimpeded and the amount that is needed by the Tigrayan people. That didn't happen. So there is no cessation of hostilities being observed by both parties at the moment.
Okay. Tsedale, I have to ask you this, because as you know, in the news cycle, we have been overwhelmed with news from Ukraine because of Russia's attack there. So how much does it concern you that the conflict in Ethiopia has very much been overshadowed by other conflicts? I mean, not least Ukraine at present, but even before that, by Afghanistan and other areas where there are also grave humanitarian crises.
It breaks my heart, to say the least. Not only concerned, I'm an Ethiopian, and I'm seeing my country tearing itself apart. So I am really devastated, to say the least. But it's not only that it's overshadowed by what's happening in Afghanistan, or in Ukraine. It is also the inability of the world order to stop this war at its track when it started in Tigray. It's a failure. It's a collective failure, both by Ethiopians and the international community, to end it as soon as it began. So we are now seeing, 18 months down the line, hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions displaced, the country destroyed beyond recognition. And so it continued. And there is nothing concrete that we see to stop it or to force the parties to sit on a negotiation table to end it. So it breaks my heart.
Then tell us how you think it actually gets better. I mean, you know better than anyone that we can't pretend that this conflict is completely new. And it seems the longer the country, as we said, remains at war, the deeper the divisions and the resentment gets. So what would it take for you to genuinely feel like this is getting better and the worst has now passed?
Well, the first thing is to have that humanitarian cessation of hostilities and to reach out to the people that are falling like leaves as we speak. People are dying in Tigray. People are dying in Amhara as well, in Wagamra region area. People are dying of famine as we speak. So the first thing that should happen is for the parties to stop, to have a cessation of hostilities agreement and agreed upon by all warring factions there, and to reach out to the people that are dying, because there is food, there is, aid available. The international community is making, food aid available there. So reach out to the people. That is really the first baby steps to see. And we will see where that kind of collaboration between warring factions that centers the suffering people of Tigray, people of Oromia, people of, Amhara region and Afar, center the people that are suffering because of this war and reach out to them first and see where the political will after that could get us. But the beginning is to feed the people at the moment.
At the beginning, but I mean, as this war progresses, layers of complications seem to be constantly added. And we've heard even that we might eventually witness the balkanization of Ethiopia. I mean, how would you view that as an outcome if it potentially stops the fighting and the suffering of so many people?
Well, the balkanization of Ethiopia is a real possibility if this war continues, because what we have seen the last 18 months is that it's not just a simple, engagement between two parties or the TPLF or the federal government. Foreign forces are involved in that country, either by supplying drones, be it Turkey, be it the UAE, Iran, and also Eritrean forces that are actively involved in complicating the war. And we have Tigray is not the only war that is really confronting Ethiopia today. Everywhere you look at, there is militarized violence. In Oromia, there is a war that is not even being reported as we speak. And so the fact that Ethiopia is facing an imminent danger of disintegration is not some fairy tale, is not some kind of bad wish. It is an actual happening. And that is why it's so important to stop the war today and sit on the negotiation table between the warring factions.
Okay, Tsedale Lemma, we're going to have to leave it there. I would like to thank you so much for being with us on the Newsmakers. Greatly appreciated. So let's broaden out the discussion and welcome three new voices now. Joining me from Addis Ababa is Ledet Muleta. She's an activist and the co-founder of the Global Ethiopian Diaspora Society. Gabriel Negatu joins us from Washington. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Eastern Africa director of the African Development Bank. And from New York is Mastewal Terefe, a former legal fellow in Ethiopia's Attorney General's office. Thanks all so much for being with us. Mastewal, let me start with you and the humanitarian truce declared on Friday. It was technically unilateral, but the TPLF has accepted it. Is it at least acknowledgement that both sides want the fighting to stop, or is it just recognition that people are dying and aid needs to get through?
Thank you, Andrea. I think both sides, it is a recognition that both sides want to end hostilities. And I think that's not a surprise that the Tigrayans have officially admitted that there's a lot of suffering happening in the region as a result of this war. So I'm not surprised that both sides are, somewhat ready to stop the fighting. But if beyond intent and beyond that good, well wishes that they have, I don't think this truce demonstrates any meaningful move towards achieving cessation of hostilities so that people who are, under siege, in my opinion, can access aid and relief that's being offered from the international community. So at least there are a few reasons just from looking at the statement that came out from the federal government, that make you less optimistic. First, it only refers to the government. The federal government doesn't really tell us whether regional actors like the Afar militia, the Amhara militia, and even Eritreans are committed to this truce. And then more importantly, it kind of links humanitarian aid with a political settlement, which involves the withdrawal of the Tigrayans from neighboring regions. So it tangles two different issues that make the implementation very difficult.
Okay. Gabriel Negatu, are you on the same page there? I mean, it seems in Mastewal's opinion, there are some good intentions behind the truce, but it's just not comprehensive enough to move forward with.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Well, it's a very good beginning. Let's start with that. It's a very good beginning. It's an expression of intent to cease fire and hopefully cessation of hostilities. It's a first step. Now, it's only been 1 week since it was announced. The TPLF, in principle, has agreed to it, even though in practice they continue to make it difficult for trucks and other supplies to arrive into the region. The concern about the Afar and the Amharas being and Eritreans being on board, I'm not concerned about that. That falls within the remit of the Ethiopian side, and it's the role of the Ethiopian government to make sure that these forces do indeed enforce the truce. So what remains is for the TPLF now to show its commitment to this humanitarian ceasefire by stopping any military activity in the area and allowing deliveries of food to get into the famine-stricken areas of Tigray.
Okay, let me ask Ledet, because yes, the government unilaterally took this step, but it does seem to be at least blooming into something that's in agreement, at least with the two major parties in conflict involved. But now the government is saying that there's still a problem delivering humanitarian aid because of fighting that has erupted in Afar. I think Gabriel doesn't seem to think it's as big of an issue as Mastewal does, but where do you stand from your position in Addis?
Thank you, Andrea. I think the government is, again, unilaterally trying, and this time TPLF has accepted that, it's important and vital that humanitarian aid needs to get through to Tigray. But in my opinion, I don't think this truce, this humanitarian truce, is something that the TPLF is invested in. I'm saying that because just about 2 weeks ago, there was about 46,000 people from the Tigray region that have crossed over to the Amhara region because they are obviously suffering from humanitarian catastrophe. This shows you that the TPLF is not really invested in the needs of the people in the Tigray region. Instead, they have a goal that they have been expressing since the beginning of the inception of this conflict, which is to gain total control of Ethiopia and hold some kind of power. So I do not believe that the TPLF has the same goal as the Ethiopian government, which is looking to save the people several times by either creating humanitarian aid to go through or by actually withdrawing from the Tigray region prematurely. So I feel like there's two different goals, and the humanitarian need is not being respected by the TPLF. Okay,
let me ask Mastewal's opinion on that. I mean, Ledet says the government actually does want to save the people here, but the TPLF just wants to take power. Do you think that's true to any extent?
Well, I respectfully disagree with Ledet on this because I think Ethiopia is extremely polarized, and we don't, as you've probably done this enough to know that there are various interpretations of how the war started and what the government's intention and the TPLF's intention is. But zooming out, we can see what impartial actors have been saying in the past 16 months about the facts on the ground. And without labeling actors like the UN and the UNHCR and other international bodies unjustifiably as imperialists or colonizers, as the government has been attempting to do in its popular messaging, these actors have been very clear about who's stopping aid from being delivered to the people. And there's actual facts being reported by these bodies showing how many of these attempts at delivery have been impeded by each side, the government versus TPLF versus the Amhara and other regional actors. And the numbers are there for everyone to look at. And it has been clear that the Ethiopian government has been, for various reasons, impeding access to those people who need aid. And now zooming out of Tigray, looking at Afar and Amhara, because there are also people in Afar and Amhara regions now in need of food delivery. There are active conflicts implicating the Tigrayan actors. So we can talk about in specific terms where aid is being impeded and by which actor, but overwhelmingly the evidence is clear that the Ethiopian government has been impeding access. And that's not just an opinion for Ethiopians. It's something that everybody has to take a clear stance on. International law governing war clearly requires all actors to not impede access to humanitarian relief to people in need.
Fair enough. Let me get back to Gabriel, because I want to look at kind of the intricacies, if I can call it, of this conflict right now. You seem to have downplayed the factionalization, really. Some characterize it, of the conflict now. But we're hearing more and more reports that that is actually the bigger problem facing Ethiopia. This conflict started more clearly in this last phase as something between the TPLF and the government. And now we're seeing other militia in other regions. I brought up the state of Afar because some are even calling the state of Afar the new front in this war. So the TPLF is blaming actually militia for blocking some of the aid deliveries to Tigray, saying that they're fighting with the government. I mean, how do you deny that there isn't a lot more complication here, Gabriel, that could really hold any peace negotiations back if we still define this conflict as the TPLF and the government?
Well, listen, first let's keep in mind Afar was drawn into this conflict by the provocation of the TPLF. The same with the Amhara functions. So the Afaris who happen to border, of course, the Tigray region, were brought in around July when the TPLF invaded those areas, and they continue to hold areas. I think out of 23 districts, about 6 are still occupied by the TPLF. Now, that happens to be the only land route through which relief into Tigray can go in. Okay, it's the only road that allows food relief to access Tigray, and that is precisely the area where the TPLF has decided to wage a conflict so that food does not enter into Tigray. And I don't know where your panelist gets her data from, but the most recent, whether it be UN or the US and others, have said that the fighting in the Abala corridor of the Afar region, which is the land route through which food can access, has become a bottleneck because the TPLF is attacking. So the factionalization, yes, it's there, but it is not enough to throw off this peace offer. I think the main culprit in this has to be the TPLF. If the TPLF stops waging attacks on these neighboring regions and says, we've put down the arms to allow food to come in, I think there is enough Ethiopian and international interest and support and goodwill and supplies that are waiting on the other side of the border to enter into Tigray.
Okay.
But the TPLF must show that it's more interested in the survival of the Tigrayan people than in winning some war target that they've set for themselves. Thank you.
Okay. Ledet, let me ask you a similar question to what I asked our last guest in the interview prior. What would have to happen for you to feel like the worst of this conflict has passed? Who would have to step up? What would have to take place in negotiations? What would have to be the next steps to make you feel like Ethiopia is truly moving toward peace?
I think, in my opinion, the number one thing would be the people of Tigray being free from the hostage situation that they are in under the TPLF, because the TPLF is pretty much holding the people of Tigray hostage and having campaigns such as what Mastewal was just saying, that the Ethiopian government is holding aid against its own people. There is no reason for the Ethiopian government to be holding aid against a region, its own citizens. So, in my opinion, the best or the solution that I would feel like peace is about to prevail in that region would be for total disarmament of TPLF, or for TPLF to completely be, dismantled from the power that they have in that region by their own people.
Okay, Mastewal, I know you think the TPLF is much less at fault than Ledet would want to believe in this scenario, but still outline for us what tactically would need to happen for a peace process to move forward.
Sure. Just to react to Mr. Gabriel's point earlier about access, essentially, who's impeding access. I think we have to really separate two things here. Humanitarian relief and access to humanitarian aid is not contingent on political compromises. It is imperative that all actors, even in active conflict, allow those aid tracks to pass. And so I accept his point that TPLF is in active engagement in Afar, but just like the government, the TPLF has the obligation to make sure that aid is reaching the Afaris, and the same way for the federal government. In active conflict situations, both parties would need to make sure aid is passing. So just because one actor has gained access and basically taken over some land, that doesn't give the other side the opportunity to say, oh, you're advancing, so I won't allow access. So I just wanted to clarify that truce is very different from a withdrawal of forces or political compromise. But having said that, I think Lidet's point is the core of what's gone wrong in Ethiopia, the core of why we're not able to settle this conflict in peaceful terms. Ledet just said that she thinks the war will end only when TPLF is disarmed and the Tigrayans are basically liberated from the people who are oppressing them. That is exactly the miscalculation that the the Ethiopian government and those who absolutely hate TPLF as a political actor are making. The Tigrayans, whether Ledet or I myself or Mr. Gabriel likes it or not, have taken a position, at least in the last regional election they had, that they support this political group. Ledet can contest whether or not that election is fair, but we can talk about Prime Minister Abiy's election the same way. Okay, so whether or not TPLF is good for the Tigrayans is not up to Ledet in Addis Ababa or me in New York or Mr. Gabriel in Washington, D.C. to decide. Just like the Amharas who elect their own leaders or Addis Ababans who elect their own leaders have a say in who administers them.
Okay.
So I think we have to separate this question and say we have to make sure that all peoples in Ethiopia, whether they want to identify with their ethnic group or not, have a say in the future of Ethiopia through a really open and participatory dialogue. And it's long overdue.
Okay.
And in this war, we have been asking for that, and political dialogue is the only way out. It's not
Mastewal. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We are completely over time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank you and Gabriel Negatu as well as Ledet Muleta for joining us. Thank you so much, and to our viewers as well, of course, for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.